My name is Charles Nduka. I'm a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, and I'm also founder and chief scientist at MTech Labs. I founded MTech Labs with a mission to try and help people to understand and improve their behaviors. In my work in facial paralysis, one of the key problems is that patients who've had surgery have to do their exercises at a specific number of frequencies and also to avoid overusing the unaffected side. It's very hard. Patients know what they need to do, but when they're in their daily lives, it's very hard for them to remember to do the exercises they have to do. My name is Charles Nduka. I'm a plastic and reconstructive surgeon specializing in facial paralysis. I'm founder and chief scientist at MTech Labs. As a surgeon specializing in facial paralysis, I had an issue. Patients need to do certain expressions at certain frequencies to improve the quality of their operation. But it's very hard for patients to understand what their face is doing because you can't see your face when you're going about your daily life. Patients often don't want to look in a mirror or use a smartphone screen. So the question was, can we develop a system that gives people feedback about their facial expressions in the real world outside of laboratory settings? The problem I was initially looking to solve was for patients with facial paralysis. When I've done an operation, patients need to do their exercises in a certain way, but it's very hard to get feedback without looking in the mirror, which they don't want to do, or using a smartphone screen, which you can't really go about your day-to-day life. So the question was, could we develop a system to give people feedback about their expressions whilst they go about day-to-day lives and to optimize their outcomes? We need to measure behavior because it's very hard to improve what you can't measure. So one of the things that we understand in day-to-day life in a car is that you have a speedometer. If you want to change your speed, you can look at the speedometer and work out what you're doing. But when you're in the world, going about your day-to-day life, it's very hard to change what you can't understand. And in the case of facial paralysis, it's very hard to understand what your face is doing because you can't see it when you're doing day-to-day activities. Facial expression research is critical because we understand intuitively how each other responds to their daily lives from looking at behavior. We understand whether our loved ones or our friends are happy or sad based on how they look, their appearance to us. But in the clinic, it's very, very difficult. You ask people how they feel, but it's subjective. And so we wanted to find a way that was more objective, more naturalistic, and gave us information about what goes on outside of the clinic or the laboratory. Quite a large proportion of people with facial paralysis suffer with mental health conditions such as depression. And depression is something that we can recognize intuitively through a person's behavior, through their expressions, through their posture, through their movements. And one thing that we wanted to do then was say, could we use these glasses that are designed for facial paralysis to broaden its applicability to understand mental health conditions such as depression or even bipolar disorder, things that relate to expressions, how you speak, how you interact, and how you move in the world. So facial expressions are critical in our interactions. We understand how people feel based on how they look, how they express themselves, how they move. Currently, we use questionnaires and surveys in the clinic to measure behavior, and that's clearly not accurate, it's biased. What we wanted to do is find a way of getting more objective information about how a person is in the real world. Conditions like depression, bipolar disorder are currently assessed through use of questionnaires and surveys, and clearly this is going to be subjective. And so by having more objective information, we get better insights and give people more actionable information about their daily lives and about how they're responding to treatment. So patients with facial paralysis are understandably very distressed in many cases about their change in expressions. And we did research which we published in 2012 that showed that a very high proportion of patients with facial paralysis suffer with anxiety and depression. Now what's interesting is that depression is another condition where we understand its severity by how a person looks and acts, their expressions and their behavior. So we had now an opportunity to connect the expression to the behavior to mental health conditions. Today, amazingly, we use very old-fashioned tools of a pen and paper to understand how people are. We ask people questions about their mood, we ask questions about their behavior, we ask questions about a whole range of things, including their diet, for example, and we know that this isn't accurate. It's subjective, it relies on patients' recall, their memory and their balance, and these things are clearly going to lead us to give inappropriate advice or even inaccurate treatments. So we need to move from being subjective to being more objective. People have tried to understand behavior using a number of ways. Initially, obviously, a pen and paper, people making notes about how they feel, diaries, etc. More recently, smartphones have been used to understand behavior, such as through various apps that help you to log your mood, log your activities, how you're feeling. The problem with that is that it can either interrupt you, but also it's only getting a very thin slice of information. So clearly there's a gap between what we need to understand and what we currently understand. Smartphones have been really beneficial to understand health, but we can see the limitations. Wearables have been used more recently to understand behavior because they give more continuous information. The problem there, of course, is the quality of the information. So if you want to understand mood, it's more than just increases or decreases in your heart rate. It's more about whether you're feeling positive or negative. And this is what's called valence. This is what psychologists use to measure emotional responses. And that's really something that is most sensitively measured from the face. So understanding behavior, particularly facial expressions, has been something people have tried for many decades. The state-of-the-art tool is facial EMG. That stands for electromyography. And this is a way of measuring the tiny electrical signals in the face as it expresses. And this has been used for decades in laboratory research. The problem is you have to use sticky electrodes. It's uncomfortable and it's not usable outside of the laboratory. More recently, people have used computer vision, let's say cameras, either fixed cameras or via smartphones to capture expressions and movements over time. The disadvantage there is that only going to work when you're using a smartphone, which means that you can't measure behavior between those times, and that's going to give you rather biased information. So beyond smartphones, people have used wearables, either things on the wrist or on the finger, which have got benefits for continuous measurement, but the quality of the information you can get is limited because it can only really measure things such as, are you sweating a bit, is your heart rate going up and down, and rather broad information about maybe how many steps you make. But a whole category of information about, for example, are you feeling high or low, positive or negative, it's just not available to those wearable devices. We spent the first 8 or 9 years focused on using electromyography as the gold standard method. And that was very beneficial for us because we used EMG combined with virtual reality to understand what the person was experiencing, seeing and hearing, and tagging that to how they were responding. And that was used principally for research. There were benefits there, but also disadvantages. You can't really do it in the real world. It's kind of confined to a fixed setting. Computer vision is very beneficial to measure expressions, but clearly that has limitations. And so in 2018, we introduced a whole new category of technology called optomyography, which gives you continuous measurement of expressions with high sensitivity like EMG, but without contact like cameras. So you have the best of both worlds. The benefit also is that you can now measure as people go about their day-to-day lives and measure a whole category of things that you can't measure with a wrist-based wearable, such as sitting, standing, posture, gait, balance, a whole range of activities. For our first 8 years or so, we used electromyography, which is a technology that's based on measuring the tiny electrical signals in the muscles. This involves placing sticky pads on the face, and therefore it's not very convenient, it's a bit inconvenient for patients, and also it's subject to movement artifacts, lots of electrical noise. Camera technologies are beneficial, but unfortunately they're not very useful for giving you continuous data. And so in 2018, we patented a whole new category of technology called optomyography. It's using optical sensing but without cameras to measure very sensitively both expressions and activities. This gives the best of both worlds, both high sensitivity but without contact on the skin, and allowing us to have continuous data across the day. For the first 8 or 9 years, we were focused on using electromyography, which is a technology involving use of electrodes on the skin to measure the tiny electrical signals as the muscle contracts. The problem with that is that it involves putting things on the face, it's not very convenient, and there can be some electrical noise. Computer vision is beneficial, however, you can't really walk around all day with a smartphone pointing at your face. And so we had to innovate to develop a new system that allowed continuous, non-contact, low-power sensing. And this is facial optomyography. This is an optical system, high sensitivity, low impact, and continuous data. So currently, if you're a researcher or a clinician, you really want to understand real-world behaviors. And at the moment, you're asking questions. But what you really want to understand is what goes on outside of the walls of the clinic or the laboratory. MTech glasses allows you to have that continuous data, objective data about what the person's doing, how they're behaving, and how they're responding in the real-world setting to optimize both your research and your therapy. The holy grail for researchers and clinicians is to really understand what people are doing in the real world. That's the only way to improve research, treatment, and therapy. What our technology does is takes the understanding beyond the walls of the clinic or the hospital. We can now understand what people do, how they're feeling, how they're acting with high accuracy. The holy grail for research is to understand the real world, how people are acting outside the lab, outside the clinic. And what our technology does is takes away the subjectivity of questionnaires and surveys and using smartphones to get real, accurate insights into how people are responding in their day-to-day experiences. For any effective treatment, you need to do two things. You need to understand where the person is at the beginning. You need to track their progress over time. Now, one of the problems with current methods is that we have this very tiny view of a person at the beginning in the clinic or in the hospital or in whatever setting you're measuring them. And what you really want to do is understand them in their daily lives. So what our technology does is gives you a much better picture of where the person is at the beginning and then allows you to track them continuously over time and also give them understanding of what's going on. Without that, it's very hard for patients to really be engaged in their management. As a clinician or therapist, you really want to understand where your patient is at the beginning and to track their progress over time. And that's the value of this technology. It gives you accurate insights both in the clinic and in the real world and tracking progress over time. One of the problems that patients have is that they don't know whether treatment's working. Say for depression, for example, it can take 4 to 6 weeks for the treatments to even start working. And so it's really hard for you to keep engaged in this treatment that may be having side effects or is inconvenient for you. So having some objective information about how you're doing over time, that will keep you motivated. We all understand that if you've got a weighing scales, if you're heavy, you can use that information to keep you motivated to know that whether you're on course or not. And this is what we're providing them. As a clinician or therapist, you really want to understand how your patient is at the beginning so you can track their changes over time. Without that information, it's really hard to know, are you making a difference? Are you helping them or not? Our technology gives information that is unavailable in the clinic because you really need to know what's going on in the real world without subjectivity. For a patient undergoing a new treatment or a new course of therapy or even some advice, knowing whether it's making a difference in your life is really, really difficult. If you don't get that information, you won't stay motivated and therefore you won't improve. And so what we can do is give actionable insights to them in the real world so they can track their progress and hopefully stay motivated and stay the course of the treatment. Patients really need to understand whether the treatment's working, otherwise they won't stay motivated. And I've experienced this. Patients travel for many miles to my clinic to try and improve their lives, but sometimes they just don't do what they need to do because they haven't got the information, is it working or not? And this is what we can do, provide them with daily information, are they making progress or are they not? As a clinician, I want to help patients to help themselves, but what they often lack is the information they need that things are working, are things improving or not? And what the technology does, it gives them that daily information, their progress over time. Training requires feedback, and without feedback it's very hard to improve. So whether it's for facial paralysis, whether you're wanting to understand is the facial expression more balanced than it was before, if it's about dietary behavior, where you're wanting to understand is the person eating too quickly or snacking between meals, if it's about understanding mood, is the person expressing more positively or more negatively, this technology gives that information to the person to empower them to make decisions that are going to help themselves. Training requires information about how you're doing over time. You can't really improve what you can't measure. Whether it's a facial paralysis around understanding is your expression more balanced than it was before, whether it's around diet, where you're understanding is your eating speed too fast or too slow, whether it's around understanding snacking behavior, eating between meals, physical activities, is your gait in balance, is your posture improving or decreasing. This is required and this can be given to patients to empower them to help themselves. High quality training requires information about how a person is at the beginning and allows them to track their progress over time. So whether this is about facial paralysis, where you're wanting to understand is your facial balance more symmetrical, whether it's around understanding eating behaviors, are you eating too quickly or too slowly, or are you snacking between meals, or whether it's around depression or other mood disorders, where you're wanting to understand is your mood high or low, or expressing positively or negatively. These are things that patients need to help themselves, and our technology can provide them with that information. Training requires you to have an understanding of where you are at the beginning and what progress you're making over time. So whether this is for facial paralysis, where you're understanding about your facial balance, your symmetry, whether it's around dietary behavior, are you eating too quickly or are you eating too slowly? Are you snacking between meals? Or whether it's around mood, are you expressing more positively or negatively over time? Our technology can give people the information they need to help themselves. We started MTech with a simple mission. How can we prevent bad outcomes for people? And this can be done with better information. Our technology can give people information that can guide them through a whole range of different conditions such as obesity, such as low mood, such as poor posture and chronic pain, a whole range of things that currently we are treating after the fact in hospitals and clinics and with drugs and other interventions. If we can move to prevention, we can help to avoid costs, avoid emotional and societal impacts, and most importantly, to help the individual to live a happier and healthier life. We started MTech with a vision to try and help people to avoid ill outcomes, whether it's dietary issues around obesity, whether it's musculoskeletal issues around facial paralysis or joint problems, or whether it's to do with mood disorders around depression. What people need is better information so they can make actionable decisions around how they live their life. We don't have tools right now to understand emotions and behavior in the real world. We sorely need it. More money isn't going to help people. Living faster lives, more technology isn't going to help necessarily. But what we need is more high-quality information. We've assembled a team of experts in AI, machine learning, development, hardware and software engineering. Christian Gajewski is one of the world-leading experts in measuring behavior in the real world. Steen Strand, our CEO, he led hardware development at Snapchat and developed the first two generations of real-world smart glasses. With this team, with this mission, with our expert advisors, we're going to put a ding in the universe.